What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. It is time to give you a recap of week number 12 of the 2024 college football season, and another more chaotic weekend here in college football. Here in the month of November, just more and more upsets did develop here in week number 12. We'll get to all those upsets here in just a moment, but I'm going to give you my 5 biggest recaps here from week number 12. 5 things that I really saw here from this weekend that really, hyped me up. And also, we got a couple more weeks to go here in the regular season. So we are getting close to postseason play and also getting to the first ever 12-team playoff. And we'll have the college football playoff rankings coming out on Tuesday night. I think there's going to be a big shakeup here in the college football playoff rankings once we get to those rankings because of all the chaos we saw here in this month of November in the last couple of weeks. And then, of course, it was another wild weekend here for week number 12. So let's go ahead and get into my 5 biggest recaps here from week number 12 of this college football season of 2024. And we start here with my number 5 biggest recap, and I just talked about it. More and more chaos in November. So we saw a lot more chaos here in week number 12. It felt like it was going to be a quiet week because Texas beat Arkansas yesterday, pretty easily. Not saying fairly easily. They only won that game by 10, but I think after, Stanford pulling off the upset against Louisville, that was a big upset there yesterday. Stanford, one of the worst teams in the ACC, pulling off a huge upset over the Cardinals. And that's a Louisville team that just beat Clemson already, so that was a big upset there in that conference. How about BYU going down to Kansas last night? Kansas State losing to Arizona State. So, more and more chaos here in the month of November. We've seen that, in the first 2 weeks, and it's already continuing here as we are in the third weekend of the month of November. And we still got 2 weeks left to go here in the regular season. There could be more and more chaos as we go into this weekend and then also in rivalry weekend. In rivalry weekend, you have all those big rivalries, and, some rivals can ruin your playoff hopes, and they can also ruin your chance to make a conference championship. So, again, we saw more and more chaos here in the month of November. That's what it's been like here for the last 3 weeks. I think there's going to be a big shakeup here in the playoff rankings. Again, we saw BYU losing to Kansas. We saw, like I said, a lot more upsets. How about Stanford upsetting Louisville? So Louisville now probably going to be out of the playoff rankings. And then you got LSU losing to Florida. That was also another big upset in the SEC, which I'll get to in just a moment. But more and more chaos in the month of November. I could go really down the list here and show you all the upsets that did happen, but there were some games out there that weren't even close, but there were some games out there that were really good finishes. And again, a lot of great games yesterday here in the month of November. It's been like that, for the first 2 weeks, and then just yesterday, it continues to be more and more chaotic. So this might be the best college football season of all time. Not really just, from the first half of the year and then second half. This might be the best season ever because, November is, like where it's been. It's been like that in the history of college football where upsets start to happen. And a lot of these teams, really start to develop, some shakeups. And then also the pressure really starts to build for a lot of these teams that are in the playoff race. But that's my number 5 biggest recap. More and more chaos here in the month of November. Let's now move on to number 4. This is not a big recap here, but Oregon might have controlled its own destiny. So you look at Oregon against Wisconsin. Boy, that was a really hard-fought performance here by this Oregon team. They did not play pretty well in this game. The defense pretty much made the difference, but where was the offense at for Oregon? I tell you what, Wisconsin came ready to play in this game, and I tell you what, if Wisconsin pulled off a huge upset here against the Ducks, the number 1 ranked team in the country, this would definitely be the biggest upset of the weekend. Look, I know Kansas upsetted a undefeated BYU team, but this would definitely be the biggest upset of the weekend because Oregon is the number 1 ranked team in the country and also number 1 in the playoff rankings. That would definitely shake up the college football playoff rankings on Tuesday. And I'll tell you what, I'm really having a hard time where to put my teams, my updated top 25 tomorrow. Again, there were so many upsets and so many big shakeups in each conference and everything. But, there was not any big shakeup in the Big Ten. The Big Ten was kind of a quiet weekend. Didn't really see a whole lot of upsets there. We saw Ohio State kind of start off slow against Northwestern. They were down 7-0, but Ohio State, kind of responded back and just pulled away from there. How about Penn State? They were probably the most impressive Big Ten team this weekend. They beat Purdue on the road pretty easily. Indiana had a bye week, and I can't wait for the Indiana and Ohio State game this weekend. That game probably decides who's going to face Oregon in the Big Ten championship. We'll find out when that game occurs, but you look at Oregon here. We're talking about mostly them here in this, recap. Oregon did not look so good against Wisconsin, but they were able to escape with a win here, 16-13. That defense was probably the difference here. So the Ducks do survive a close game and a close call here against Wisconsin. This was probably their last tough competition before they head into their final game of the season. They'll have a bye week coming up this week, so a time, to regroup and get healthy before the rivalry game against Washington. They get that game at home, so if Oregon wins that game, they're likely going to finish undefeated, and they might be that only undefeated Power 4 team because BYU just lost yesterday, so I think Oregon actually is the only undefeated team now as a Power 4 team that's undefeated. But, you got Group of 5 teams that are still undefeated. You got Army that's undefeated. There might be only a couple of undefeated teams left here in this college football season. But, yeah, Oregon might have controlled its own destiny with a win over Wisconsin here. And then going into the final game of the season against Washington, if they win that game, they'll definitely be in the Big Ten championship and finish likely 12-0. So yeah, the Ducks, again, did not play that well against Wisconsin. They definitely did not look like the number 1 team in the country. But yeah, Wisconsin was just ready to play in this game. But that is my number 4 biggest recap. Oregon might have controlled its own destiny. Let's now move on to number 3. And there was a big shakeup in the Big 12, so let's talk about the upset last night. Kansas upsetting BYU. I called it. Last week, this was my most likely upset alert game to probably happen here in this conference, and that's exactly what we got. And I did say, don't sleep on this Kansas Jayhawk team. They upsetted Iowa State from a couple weeks ago, and then they go into BYU and they knocked them off 17-13. The game was actually pretty ugly, but it was a defensive battle. Both defenses, I think, were pretty even. I mean, offensively, I would probably give the advantage to Kansas here in this one because that probably did make a difference here, but the Jayhawk defense was definitely the difference. BYU's offense just could not really get things going, so now you look at the Big 12 standings. Nobody is undefeated in conference play. BYU is still that front runner with 1 loss, but how about Colorado dominating Utah 49-24? Colorado might be the best team in the Big 12 based off of what I've seen this year. Look, they got 2 losses. The 2 losses come, like the 1 loss comes to Kansas State, but the other loss comes to Nebraska in the non-conference. So they have 1 loss in the Big 12. But just think about it. If Colorado would have beaten Kansas State, they would have probably been undefeated and sitting first place right now in the Big 12 standings. But you look at Kansas State, they took a really absolute beating from Arizona State in the first half. Had a chance to probably come back in that second half, but they were not able to do that. Arizona State hangs on for the win. Now you got Arizona State with just 2 losses in the Big 12. Iowa State is still alive here in this race. They're sitting there at 5-2 in the conference play. So yeah, if BYU, let's say they lose another game, Colorado's going to go into first place, but let's say if Colorado slips up against Kansas this weekend. Yes, Colorado is playing the Jayhawks this weekend, and I would not be surprised if Kansas pulls off the upset. I think this is going to be a very good matchup, a really high-scoring game between these 2 teams. But let's say Colorado loses. Could Iowa State make it to the Big 12 championship? But what if BYU loses another game? Could it be Colorado versus Arizona State in the Big 12 championship? That's really a big shakeup here in the Big 12, though, because we don't know what's going to happen. These standings and these, races here in the conferences, they are pretty much just wide open. And the last couple weeks here in the Big 12 are definitely going to be chaotic, in my opinion. Again, Kansas and Colorado will play each other this weekend. Again, I would not be surprised if the Jayhawks do pull off the upset, but Colorado is definitely the most talented team in the Big 12. Again, Colorado, if they win out, they're going to definitely get in there as an automatic bid in the Big 12 championship. They got this game against Kansas, and then they got Oklahoma State to close things out. Oklahoma State is not a very good team whatsoever. BYU, though, Again, if they win out, they'll still make it to the Big 12 championship, but if they slip up, it could be Iowa State or Arizona State in the Big 12 championship. So definitely keep an eye on it here if you're a big fan of this conference in the Big 12. This conference, we knew in the offseason these teams are going to beat up on each other, and they're beating up on each other here in the month of November. So that is my number 3 biggest recap. We did see a big shakeup here in the Big 12. All right, to the most important recaps now. Moving on to number 2, it was a wild week in the ACC. So it wasn't just a wild week in the Big 12. It was also a wild week here in this conference, the ACC. First off, how about Clemson beating Pittsburgh here on the road in a close game, 24-20? That was almost a slip-up for Clemson. You know, if Clemson would have lost this game, they definitely would have been out of the ACC championship race. But they finished out 7-1 in conference play. And what a great finish to this game. Cade Klubnik with the rushing touchdown just let his, team, he just not wanted to let his team lose. He refused to let his team lose here in this game. And we can tell that Cade Klubnik was ready to go in this game. Now, first half, I would say Clemson was pretty much dominant, but second half, Pittsburgh came out there, had a pretty good chance to win this game, but they had so many penalties called against them. There were so many bad calls in this game, and also definitely a lot of flags that went probably in Clemson's favor, to be honest. But yeah, it was a wild week here in the ACC. How about Stanford, again, pulling off the upset against Louisville? That was an upset that I did not even see coming. I didn't put it on my upset alert video because Stanford has not been really that good of a team this year. Now, you look at the ACC championship race. SMU beating Boston College 38-28. SMU, they definitely looked like they were going to lose to Boston College, but SMU ran out the clock and they scored like a last-second touchdown to win it by at least 10 points. Miami had a bye week, so we can't really talk much about the Hurricanes. But you look at Clemson. They're sitting there at second place in the standings, but Miami still has 2 conference games to play. Miami has to play Wake Forest. They get that game at home, and then they play Syracuse on the road. So if Miami wins out, they're going to make it to the ACC championship, but if SMU wins out, they'll also make it there. I think for Clemson, they're going to have to see Miami lose another game. And I think Miami might have a chance to probably slip up in that game against Syracuse. I don't really expect them to slip up against Wake Forest because Wake Forest has not been like that really good of a team. So, yeah, I could definitely see Miami slipping up in that last game of the regular season in Syracuse. So, yeah, Clemson just needs a loss from either one of these teams, SMU or Miami, to probably get into the ACC title game. Yeah, the ACC has been crazy, but it's not really been that crazy, probably in the past and everything, but you got 3 teams sitting there at the top, SMU, Clemson, and then Miami. Again, Miami is 5-1 in conference play. Clemson just finished out at 7-1, and then SMU is still undefeated at 6-0. So SMU has 2 conference games left, or I should say 3. I think they actually got 2, if I'm not mistaken, but they got to play Cal and Virginia, I believe, next here in the ACC to close things out. So if SMU, again, wins out, they're in the ACC championship. But if Clemson, if Miami loses like one more game, Clemson is automatically into the conference championship because Clemson and Miami don't play each other. But yeah, this was about the ACC. It was a wild week here in this conference. Again, what a great finish to the Clemson and Pittsburgh game. That was probably the best game of the ACC this weekend. And then just overall Stanford upsetting Louisville. That was a big upset there. So that's my number 2 biggest recap. Let's now get into number 1. Georgia keeps its playoff hopes alive. So Georgia and Tennessee, the game of the weekend here. College game day, of course, was down there. So I think we assumed this was like the game of the weekend. Well, how about the SEC, though? Let's talk about, besides Georgia, let's talk about LSU and Florida. How about Florida beating LSU at home 27-16? DJ Lagway is back from injury. I think Florida is a really good team with DJ Lagway in there at quarterback. Not saying that Graham Mertz is a bad quarterback, but he is injured. And I'm not saying the third-string quarterback was a bad quarterback either, but I just feel like with DJ Lagway in there with his throwing arm strength, I feel like, Florida is just a really decent team. They may not seem like a decent team because of their record, but I tell you what, Florida's now got a pretty good chance to pull off a huge upset against Ole Miss. Again, they played so well in that game, especially on the defensive side of the football. and that offense just clicked in right away in the second half, and LSU just could not get past this Florida defense. So that was probably the upset of the weekend in the SEC. We saw, Texas beat Arkansas on the road 20-10. You look at Texas and Texas A&M, that matchup coming up in a couple more weeks. Now you look at the SEC standings. Georgia is sitting there at third place in the standings. They finish out their SEC conference record with 6-2. If Georgia either, if Texas A&M or Texas even lose a game, like I said, Texas and Texas A&M play each other in the last game of the regular season. If both of those teams, if one of those teams loses, then Georgia's going to make it to the SEC championship, because let's say Texas loses to Texas A&M, Georgia's going to get automatically in because they have the head-to-head win over Texas. But if Texas A&M loses, Georgia definitely gets automatically in, because I think Georgia would definitely probably have a better resume than Texas A&M perhaps, but they're just going to put them in regardless because they're identical 6-2 records. But yeah, Georgia, talking about their game against Tennessee, this offense for Georgia got off to a pretty slow start. Tennessee was up 10-0 in the first quarter, and then it looked like Kirby Smart just motivated his players from the rest of the way. It was all Georgia in the second half. Carson Beck played extremely well in this game. I was impressed with the offense, and the running game seemed like it got going in the second half as well. And Tennessee's defense just really could not stop the passing game of Carson Beck. This is the Carson Beck that I know. This is the Carson Beck that, was playing really well from last year. This year hasn't really been his year. He had so many doubts going into this game against Tennessee that, Georgia fans were even saying to put a different quarterback in. But Carson Beck is a really good quarterback. He is very underrated. I know he hasn't had a big season, but this was a huge win for Georgia to not just keep their playoff hopes alive, but also their SEC championship hopes alive. Again, let's say if Texas loses a game, and then also if, Texas A&M loses, because Texas A&M has Auburn on the road coming up this weekend, and Texas has Kentucky. What if both of those teams lose this weekend? Because we've seen a lot of chaos here in the month of November. Then Georgia becomes that front runner in the SEC. But what if Tennessee, jumps up to that second place spot? Because there's no way Alabama can pass Tennessee, because Tennessee has the head-to-head over Alabama. So, yeah, this SEC race is wide open, and also it's going to be a great finish here going into the last couple weeks of the season. And I'm just very excited to see what the standings will look like at the end of the day. I think it's going to be Georgia versus Texas in the SEC championship, because I think Texas can probably beat Texas A&M. That's probably my prediction as of right now, but I could change my pick going into the last couple weeks here of this season. But again, Georgia, very impressive win against Tennessee. Their defense played pretty well. Tennessee just really could not get past this Georgia team, especially in the second half. But Georgia keeps its playoff hopes alive, and this is the Georgia team that we've known ever since Kirby Smart has got here. And they played just like they did against Texas, back on October 19th. So that is my number one biggest recap. So those are my biggest recaps from week number 12 of this 2024 college football season. Let me guys know what you think about my recap down in the comments below, and what you think about week number 12 in the comments below as well. Was it chaotic, or was it another big weekend of college football? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.